Every year, on the last Saturday of October, the village of Kael holds a festival. There's music, there's food, there's laughter, and for one night, outsiders are actually welcome. But here's the thing. In the last 40 years, not a single outsider who stayed past midnight has ever made it home. Not one. The villagers know this, the local police know this, and somehow the festival keeps happening. This is the story of a man named Daniel Mercer, a travel blogger from the city, who showed up to Kael on the last Saturday of October, 3 years ago. And what happened to him that night is something that, to this day, has no rational explanation. I'm going to tell you exactly what he saw, exactly what he heard, and exactly what he found out, just barely before midnight. Daniel Mercer was the kind of guy who went looking for places most people never heard of. He ran a small travel blog, nothing massive, maybe 30,000 followers, and his thing was finding villages, small towns, and forgotten corners of the world that had what he called a weird energy. Places where the locals had that look in their eye, the one that says, "We know something you don't." He'd been to 7 countries in 2 years. He'd slept in a room above a pub in rural Ireland, where the locals refused to say the name of the hill behind the village. He'd eaten dinner in a fishing town in Portugal, where nobody spoke after dark. He'd gotten pretty good at reading a place. But nothing prepared him for Kael. Kael is a real village. You can find it on a map if you look hard enough. It sits about 90 minutes from the nearest city, tucked into a valley that the road seems to forget about halfway through. The population is listed as around 400 people, but locals will tell you the real number is closer to 300. The rest, they say, are people who came and stayed. Daniel found out about the festival the way he found out about most things. A single comment buried deep in a forum post. Someone had written, and I'm paraphrasing here, "If you ever hear about the Kael Harvest Festival, don't go. And if you're stupid enough to go, leave before midnight." That was it. No explanation. The account was deleted 2 days later. For most people, that's enough to say no thank you. But for Daniel, that one comment was basically a neon sign. He started digging. What Daniel found, or more accurately, what Daniel couldn't find, is where this story starts to get unsettling. Because here's the thing about missing persons cases. They leave a paper trail. A report is filed. A name gets logged somewhere. Families make noise. Journalists write something, even if it's 3 paragraphs in a local paper. But when Daniel searched for disappearances connected to Kael, he found almost nothing. There was one article from 1987, a local paper, now out of print, about a group of 4 college students who attended the Kael Harvest Festival and never came back to campus. The article was short. It mentioned an investigation, it mentioned the students were last seen at the festival, and then there was a follow-up 3 weeks later that said the case had been resolved, with no further details. Resolved. 4 people vanish, and the case is just resolved. Daniel found 2 more references. One was a missing persons bulletin from 2004, a 42-year-old woman named Claire Hoban, a photographer, last known location, Kael. One was a blog post from 2011, written by someone who claimed their brother had attended the festival and come back different, and then, 6 months later, moved to Kael permanently and stopped calling. That last one stuck with Daniel, not the disappearances, the coming back different. He decided he had to go. Daniel arrived in Kael on a Friday afternoon, the day before the festival. His first impression was that it was actually beautiful. That was the thing he wrote in his notes later that he kept coming back to. It was so beautiful it made me feel stupid for being suspicious. The valley the village sat in was covered in autumn color. The houses were old but well kept. The people he passed on the main road smiled and nodded. There were hand-painted signs pointing toward the festival grounds. Children were running between the market stalls being set up for the next day. He checked into the only guest house in town, a place run by a woman named Edith, probably in her late 60s, who had the kind of calm face that made you feel like nothing bad had ever happened near her. She gave him a room on the 2nd floor, made him tea, and asked the usual questions. "Where are you from? How did you hear about us? Staying long?" When Daniel mentioned the festival, Edith smiled. Everyone loves the festival, she said. And Daniel wrote this down word for word because it lodged in his head. She said, just make sure you don't get too caught up in it. The night goes fast here. He asked her what she meant. She picked up her tea, smiled again, and changed the subject. The festival was unlike anything Daniel had experienced. And look, he'd been to festivals, real ones, loud ones in cities with crowds of thousands, so he wasn't easily impressed. But something about the Kael Harvest Festival had a quality he struggled to describe in his notes. He used the word thick. Like the air was thick, like the music was thick, like everything had a weight to it that normal things didn't have. The music was live, a group of older men playing instruments Daniel didn't recognize, with a sound that was somewhere between folk and something older. Not unpleasant, actually deeply pleasant. That was almost the problem. There was food everywhere, free food, wine that was offered in ceramic cups by people who didn't take money, fires in iron baskets every 20 feet, even though the villagers danced. Everyone danced. And here's the first thing Daniel noticed that didn't sit right. At every other festival he'd ever been to, there were outsiders like him. Tourists, backpackers, people with cameras. But as Daniel looked around, he slowly realized he was the only one. Every face he saw was local. Every face was someone who belonged here. He asked a man standing near one of the fires if other visitors usually came to the festival. The man looked at him, not unkindly, and said, "They come. Not all of them stay." Daniel asked what he meant. The man smiled and walked away. At that point, it was 9:45 p.m. At around 10:30, Daniel met a girl named Sasha. She looked about 20. Dark coat, dark eyes, and the specific kind of nervous energy of someone who is trying very hard not to look nervous. She appeared at his elbow near one of the food tables and said, quietly, without looking at him, "You drove here, right? You have a car." He said yes. She said, "Where is it parked?" He told her, "On the Eastern Road, about a 5-minute walk from the festival grounds." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "If I told you something, would you leave right now, tonight, and take me with you?" Daniel said yes. She looked around. Then she leaned close and said, "The people who don't come back, they don't disappear. They stay. They choose to stay. But they don't choose it before midnight. They choose it after. And after midnight, it's not really a choice anymore." Daniel stared at her. She continued, "The festival isn't what it looks like. The music, the food, the fires, it's all part of it. By midnight, if you're still here, something in you shifts. You stop wanting to leave. And by morning, you belong to this place permanently." He asked her how she knew this. She said, "Because my mother came here 22 years ago and never left. And I was born here, and I have been trying to leave for 5 years, and I can't get past the ridge. Every time I try, I turn back. I don't want to. I just do." It was 11:15. Daniel made a decision in about 4 seconds. He grabbed Sasha's arm and they walked, not ran, because running, he felt, would draw attention, toward the Eastern Road. The music was still playing behind them. The fires were still burning. Nobody seemed to notice them leave. The walk to the car felt longer than 5 minutes. Daniel couldn't tell if that was real or if his nervous system was just making time stretch. Sasha didn't speak. She kept her eyes on the road ahead and her hands in her pockets, and she walked with the deliberate stride of someone who had done this before and failed. They reached the car at 11:32. Daniel unlocked it. They got in. He started the engine. And that's when Sasha grabbed his arm. She was staring at the festival in the distance, the lights of it just barely visible over the tree line. Her face had changed. The nervous energy was gone. What was there now was something else entirely. Softer, slower, like she was listening to something far away. She said, barely over a whisper, "I don't want to go." Daniel put the car in drive. He said, "I know." And he drove. He didn't look in the rearview mirror until they were over the ridge. By the time they reached the city, it was almost 2 in the morning. Sasha had barely spoken since they left, but as they pulled into a petrol station, she looked at Daniel and said, "It's gone." He asked what she meant. She said, "The pull, the thing that always pulled me back, it's gone. I think you have to be with someone who isn't affected for it to break." Daniel stayed in the city for 3 more days. He filed what he knew with the National Missing Persons Organization. He wrote up his account and posted it on his blog, where it sat for about 2 weeks before being shared 500,000 times. Then 3 things happened that Daniel didn't expect. First, his blog was hit with a copyright claim on the post from an organization he'd never heard of, with an address in the same county as Kael. The claim was bogus. It was his own writing, but it took 3 weeks to resolve, and during those 3 weeks, the post was hidden. Second, he received a letter, a physical letter, handwritten from someone who signed it only as E. The handwriting was neat. It said only, "She'll want to go back. They always do. The pool doesn't break, it transfers." Daniel didn't understand that at first. He understood it 6 months later when Sasha called him at 11 p.m. on the last Friday of October and said, "I need you to talk to me. I think I'm in my car. I think I'm driving." She was 2 miles from Kael. He stayed on the phone with her for 3 hours. She made it through the night. The festival, as far as anyone can tell, is still happening. And every year, the list of people who attend and never come home gets a little longer. Not a lot longer, just enough to keep going, just enough to keep the village at exactly the same population it's always been, 300 and something people. And the rest, as the locals will tell you, are people who came and stayed. Now, is any of this verifiable? Some of it. The missing persons reports are real. The deleted forum account is real. What Daniel described and what Sasha described, I cannot prove, but I also can't explain it away. What I do know is this. There are places in the world that operate by rules we don't fully understand. And most of the time, the people who learn those rules are the ones who didn't leave in time. Daniel got out, barely. If you found this story interesting or unsettling, which honestly, same thing, hit subscribe because we do this every single week. Strange, dark, mysterious. Sleep well.